Alrighty, welcome back in, everyone. We just got into my All-American team for this year. Very tough group to put together, and a lot of those groups that are about as tightly knit as you can possibly find. Some groups that are incredibly hard to find those three or two guys that you want, but feel pretty good about the group that I had, and we'll move on to the 2025 season a little bit. Let's talk about the quarterbacks as we get into the 2025 season. Insanely tough list to rank, if I'm being totally honest with you. I think there's a lot of different guys that are going to be incredibly tough to deal with, and I think there's a lot of guys that are really experienced, a little bit inconsistent. I think there's some other guys that are incredibly talented, but not so experienced, so it'll be a really interesting thing to watch. Yeah, Anthony, I do agree with you. I think the All American linebackers have to be guys that are very kind of consistent in that run game, and there's not so many guys that are overly consistent. I think Danny Stutzman's the kind of A tier of all of that, and definitely a guy that I think would be leading the way in a lot of ways in that linebacker group. But as we head into the 2025 group with the quarterbacks, I think you have to start with I think this group is pretty solid. I think the 10 guys that you rank are relatively solid. Now, there is some leeway here where you want to pull one guy out, throw one guy in, maybe a Kevin Jennings into this list or something like that. I would totally understand it. But I think when I look at this group, the 10 that I have are roughly the 10 that I would rank, and then you could put them in roughly any order you wanted, if I'm being totally honest. So try to keep projection out of this as much as possible, but let's be honest. As we head into 2025, there's going to be some projection. There's going to be some things that you just bet on the athletic ability, the ability of some of these quarterbacks to carry them, and that kind of is the story for the number one guy or the number 10 guy here. Arch Manning is my number 10 quarterback as we head into this thing, and I think it's going to be up for debate, and I think there's big time worries here. There's no doubt about that, but you look back at the three games that he played throughout the year, whether it was UTSA when he came in and lit the world on fire, he played Mississippi State, played some really great football, ULM was probably C plus football, and I think it was one that really showed some of the worries of him, where he definitely missed some reads to go throw some deeper balls that probably weren't all the way there. He definitely does some things that are kind of relying on that ability to carry him and can put himself into precarious situations. So it'll be a really interesting thing to watch. I think he has all the ability in the world to end this list on the very top of the list at the very end of the year, but overall, the experience and the decision making are questions as you head into the year, but he's definitely a guy that I couldn't leave lower on this list. He's absolutely elite in every sense of the word, and definitely a guy that I think is going to light the world on fire. Still some questions out there, but it's hard to bet against this guy right about now, given what we've seen. Nik Malava is my 9 quarterback going into 2025, and he's a guy that you just have to get that offensive line working. He's a very talented kid and definitely can make all the throws in the world, and when he is rolling, he looks about as good as any quarterback you'll find across the country, but I do think when you look at the downfield accuracy, it's not quite to where it needs to be. And that Tennessee offense, while, they're going to run the ball, and that's where they're going to kind of make their money, they got to hit those downfield passes. If they do that, they can become not only a great offense, but one of the most dangerous offenses in the country, and it's got to be this guy leading the way. He's going to have to take over in a big-time way because Dylan Sampson is walking out the door, incredibly talented back that gave you a lot of leeway in last year, so definitely going to be a guy that needs to take a big step forward, but the ability is out of this world, and definitely a guy that I think is going to be remarkable in 2025, and will be really fun to see what he can do, but needs to take some big steps forward, especially in that downfield passing game. Sam Levitt is my number 8 guy. I saw someone ranked him number 1. Not necessarily sure I can get on board with that, but he is a guy that I would love to lead my team. He definitely has the energy that you very much need, and I think he's one of those guys that brings an edge to a team that needs it in a lot of different ways, especially with Cam Scadaboo walking out the door. You need a guy to lead the way with a little bit of edge, with a little bit of energy. I think this is definitely the guy to do that. Now, there is some questions about his elite level passing ability, and I have the same ones. I think you look forward to next season, I think there's a lot of things to like about this kid. I think there's also some reason to think that maybe he'll take a little bit of a step back. You don't have that security blanket that was Cam Scadaboo in this year, and you're going to your redshirt sophomore year. Could be a year that he very well explodes, becomes one of the best players in the country. Could also be a year that he takes a little bit of a step back. So I'm a little bit torn on Sam Levitt. I think the talent is absolutely clear and definitely going to be a guy I'm going to watch very closely. But I think as you head into next year, you got to have questions about this group, especially without Cam Scadaboo right next to him. Carson Beck is my number 7 guy. He is a great quarterback. I understand that there's a lot of people that will say a lot of different things about Carson Beck, but you take out those 4 middle games and you can't. But at the end of the day, if you do take out those 4 middle games, he was really impressive this year. He did not throw a pick in the final 4 or 5 games in the season. He's a guy that the question is the injury. There's no doubt about that, and definitely will be interesting to watch that over the next 4 or 5 months. But definitely a guy that could find his way back to a number or round one draft pick. Not sure if he can be number one, but definitely a guy that could really burst onto the scene and make some really huge plays. I think you look at what Shannon Dawson can bring to that guy. Definitely going to need the offensive line to step up a little bit more because he's definitely not a guy that handles pressure quite as well as Cam Ward does. But at the end of the day, very talented kid. If he can get healthy at the right time, then he can do some really incredible things for Miami. John Mateer is my sixth quarterback. He's going over to Oklahoma from Washington State this year, and he's a guy that's going to be really awesome to watch. Now, Oklahoma has a lot of issues, so it might not matter all that much. As upsetting as that is for a lot of Sooners fans out there, I think you look at one of the most electric players in the country, but the O-line is going to be a problem. The wide receiver talent is going to be a problem. Now, it could be a little bit better than I'm thinking of it right now, but definitely going to be a group that you're going to need to get the most out of. So the question is about the supporting cast. It's not necessarily about this quarterback, at least in my mind. I think he can do just about everything he did at Washington State, at Oklahoma. It's going to be a little bit tougher. Those SEC defenses are going to be coming at you pretty quickly, and that offensive line of yours does not necessarily look like one that's going to protect you for too long. So it's going to be interesting to watch what he can do. I think he can build off 2024, but it might just come down to the people around him as much as it comes down to him. Drew Aller here at number 5. I think this is a guy that I go back and forth on a lot of different ways. I think there's a number of things to like with him. There's a number of reasons to believe that he could be a number 1 overall pick in 2026. He has all the ability in the world. He's obviously built like an NFL quarterback at 6'3", I believe, 215, something like that. Very talented kid that can do everything you possibly want him to do. There are some issues with inconsistencies. There's no doubt about that. There's some issues with some big-time games where he's kind of shrunk away from the moment. So it's going to be interesting to watch what he does in 2025. It feels like a year where everything can really start clicking for him. I felt like this year was kind of that you're getting there, and then next year maybe everything falls into place and he becomes one of the very best quarterbacks in the country. So it's going to be awesome to watch what he can do in 2025. I'm still a little bit nervous about some of the issues that he's had, but overall cannot deny what he can do on the football field. And Anthony, you make a good argument. I think Carson and John Mateer are very, very even. I think you look at both of them, very different styles of quarterback, but I'll lean John Mateer because of the running ability and because of the non-injury. But overall, I think they're about as even as you could possibly have. I love DJ Lagway. This one is a little bit of projection, but I'm more than happy to die on this hill because I think the ability is out of this world. We saw what we saw at the end of last year where he beat LSU, where he beat Ole Miss, and he's ridiculous. He's a guy that obviously makes some mistakes as a young quarterback would, but the arm strength is absolutely insane. The arm talent is ridiculous, and you look at what he can do going into 2025, there's going to be a lot of things on his plate. There's no doubt about that. There's going to be a lot of things that he's going to have to deal with and he's going to have to handle, and a lot of them are going to be because of his head coach. You know, he's going to be the guy that Billy Napier ties himself to for the rest of his career, and it's going to be interesting to see if he can deliver in 2025. So a lot of pressure on this kid. There's no doubt about that, but I think you look at the ability, it's about as good as anyone in the country, and it's hard to deny what he can do in 2025. Lenore Sellers is my number 3 guy. I think you look at all the quarterbacks across the country, very hard to find a quarterback that was playing better football in the back half of the season than Lenore Sellers. I think an absolute freak athlete and someone that is taking real strides forward throughout the season, passing the football, and especially downfield, passing the football has been very effective throughout the year, and it's going to be awesome to see what he can do in 2025. I think he could outright steal the Heisman, if I'm being totally honest. I think he could be a very, very dangerous player and definitely be someone that, even without Dowell Loggins and now bringing in Mike Shula, I think it's going to be a really, really ridiculous offense. And I think Lenore Sellers can very well lead that. I think he could very well be the Heisman in 2025. He's a very talented kid and one of those guys that South Carolina's just waiting for that last thing to click. If it does, Lenore Sellers could become one of the most dangerous players in the country. And then you're looking at South Carolina possibly making a CFP run at the very end of this thing. Cannot say enough good things about this kid. And another one kind of like DJ Lagway that's a little bit of projection, but cannot deny the ability of this kid. Garrett Nussmeier is my number 2 guy. I think this is a guy that's as good as anyone in the country. When you look at the passes that he can make, very few guys can make them as consistently as he can. Now, the issue that I do have is the turnovers. That's a very real thing, and it's got to be ratcheted back a little bit next year. Now, the one thing you don't want to do is ratchet it back all the way and lose all the ability that he brings, because some of his ability is pushing it into windows that are a little bit tight for some people, and Garrett Nussmeier has the ability to throw into. So, very talented kid. The pocket mobility of this kid is downright special. He's one of the best pocket mobility quarterbacks in the entire country, and definitely a guy that could very well be the number 1 overall pick going into next year. I cannot think higher of this kid. There are some worries when you come down to the turnovers and some things that really do put him behind the eight ball. But overall, I think a lot of things could click for this kid in 2025, especially if that offensive line gets moving, and then you're staring down a group that it's going to be really hard to stop offensively, and a guy that it's going to be really hard to stop on his way to a possible Heisman Trophy. And then Cade Klubnik. This is the best quarterback in the country going into 2025 as far as I'm concerned, and he has all the confidence in the world to throw the football when he needs to. He has the mobility that is absolutely a huge plus, and then the experience where you very much need it. Now, the worry is definitely the consistency. Like we talked about Anthony, there's a lot of different things to talk about with this kid, and a lot of different things that you do worry about. When he played Georgia, when he played Louisville, when he played some of these teams, he didn't necessarily look all that great. Now, I do think the Texas game was a little bit of a flip of a switch. Now, obviously, you'll never really know until he gets on that field in 2025, but I think he could very well steal the show. If that offensive line gets fully in order, I think he could be absolutely incredible, and it's going to be awesome to see what he can do in this year. I have him as the best quarterback in the country going into next year, but frankly, I think there's a good argument for a number of the guys on this list to make that number one spot. But this is a group of either really young, really exciting players like Arch Manning, like DJ Lagway, who, Anthony, you could very well put him at 10. I think when you rank these guys, all 10 of them, you could put in a number of different orders. Now, if you were to drop Garrett Nussmeier or Cade Klubnik a little bit lower, then maybe I'll disagree a little bit. But at the end of the day, I do think it's a group of 10 that you can play around with a lot. And DJ Lagway is one of those guys that it depends on how much you buy in. Obviously, I'm buying in a ton. Definitely some people that are a little bit more wary of what Florida is going to be overall next year, but a very interesting group. I know you have the young, exciting, talented players. You have the inconsistent veterans, and it's going to be really interesting to see what happens with this group, but it's going to be a race to see who finishes number one, who probably is the number one overall pick going into 2026, and it's going to be awesome to watch all these quarterbacks go at it. But let's take our second break here, and when we come back, we'll get into some transfer portal talk. Let's talk about all the different things happening with the transfer portal. We'll get into all the little details, all the things happening after the national title, because Notre Dame's losing quite a few offensive linemen, but we'll talk about it right after this, so stick with us.